He was the dream, a perfect face in a perfect era. But behind the studio lights, Tab Hunter lived a double life that could have destroyed him. In an industry obsessed with secrets, his was the most dangerous of all. The cameras loved his charisma. The closet demanded his silence. What happens when a man is forced to choose between his career and his truth? The 1950s were kind to Arthur Andrew Kelm, born in 1931 in the glow of Hollywood's golden age. His stepfather's obsession with beauty pageants and stardom planted seeds early. The notion that a face could be currency, that perfection was survival. By 17, he'd already changed his name to Tab Hunter, a calculated choice that felt less like reinvention and more like erasure. He arrived in Los Angeles lean, tall, and achingly photogenic, the type of young man who made casting directors lean forward in their chairs. The studios saw a blank canvas, someone malleable, someone who could be shaped into exactly what America wanted to watch. What they saw on the surface, however, was only half the story. The golden age of Hollywood operated on a single, unspoken rule. The image was everything, and the truth was negotiable. Tab Hunter arrived just as that machinery reached its apex. Rock Hudson had already discovered how to navigate these waters. James Dean was figuring it out. But Tab came with a particular vulnerability, an almost desperate eagerness to please, to belong, to become the person the cameras needed him to be. By 1954, at just 23, he'd already landed a contract with Warner Brothers that felt like destiny. They groomed him meticulously. Writing lessons, acting coaches, photo shoots that captured him in every conceivable angle of masculine allure. He was assigned roles in sword and sandal epics and Western pictures, parts designed to showcase his physical presence without demanding much emotional depth. The studios understood their audience. They understood what a certain type of male viewer craved. Tab understood it too, and he complied. The 1950s were his kingdom. The Burning Hills came first, a Western that positioned him as a leading man capable of carrying a picture. Then came Damn Yankees, where he danced and sang opposite Gwen Verdon, proving he could command a screen and hold an audience's attention through pure charisma. These roles cemented something crucial. Tab Hunter wasn't just another handsome face. He was bankable. He could draw audiences, sell tickets, generate revenue. In the language of the studio system, he had become an asset, and assets, by definition, had to be protected and controlled. But even then, rumors circulated in the bars and bathhouses of Los Angeles, whispers about where Tab really spent his time, about the kinds of relationships that filled his private hours. The industry gossip mill was ruthless and omniscient. Nothing stayed hidden in Hollywood, and yet everything did. The studio system had developed a sophisticated apparatus for managing such complications. If a star became a liability, the machinery could move to contain him. If he was valuable enough, compromises could be negotiated. Tab Hunter was valuable. Young, beautiful, marketable. But he was also vulnerable in ways that terrified the executives who owned his contract. The tension between these two facts would define his entire career. In 1955, something shifted that would haunt him for decades. A scandal emerged, though the word scandal doesn't quite capture it. More like a near miss that everyone could see coming but nobody wanted to acknowledge. An unauthorized nude photograph had circulated, allegedly part of a portfolio from his early modeling days, before he'd become a star. The image was explicit enough to be dangerous, innocent enough by today's standards to seem almost quaint. But in 1955, in an America obsessed with moral purity and masculine conformity, such a photograph was a ticking bomb. The studios moved quickly, deploying their damage control apparatus with practiced efficiency. The photo disappeared from public circulation. Denials were issued. Lawyers sent letters. The machinery whirred and ground, and the threat receded, but only partially, and only for a time. What Tab Hunter learned from this incident was profound and terrible. That his life belonged to the industry more than it belonged to him. That his desires, his identity, his most intimate self, had to be subordinated to the needs of the machine that had made him famous. The lesson was burned into him, seared deep, and it would shape every decision he made for the next 25 years. The fallout from the photograph incident wasn't dramatic or immediate. Instead, it was subtle and insidious. Studio executives began to take more interest in his personal life. They needed to know where he was at night, who he was seeing, what story they needed to tell if questions arose. The solution, tried and tested with other stars, was surprisingly straightforward. Tab needed a girlfriend. Someone beautiful, someone photographable, someone who could be seen on his arm at premieres and nightclubs. The studios had a roster of available starlets, young women whose own careers might benefit from the association, or who were complicit in similar arrangements. The machine worked because everyone involved understood what was being asked of them and why. It wasn't quite a transaction, but it wasn't quite spontaneous affection either. It was Hollywood's version of a necessary fiction. He continued working, and working hard. Roles piled up, Track of the Cat, The Sea Chase, Return to Treasure Island. Vehicles designed to keep him in front of audiences, to remind them of his face, his presence, his manufactured desirability. Each film was a small masterpiece of marketing. Tab Hunter in exotic locations. Tab Hunter in period costumes. Tab Hunter shirtless whenever the script would allow. The studios understood the economics of desire and knew how to monetize it. Meanwhile, in 1957, he even recorded a novelty song, Young Love, which became an unexpected hit, introducing him to audiences beyond the cinema. The record climbed the charts, and suddenly Tab Hunter wasn't just an actor. He was a recording artist, a personality, a cultural phenomenon. The success felt hollow, even as it accumulated. Each new role, each new photograph, each new public appearance felt like a small death, a piece of authenticity surrendered in exchange for security and continued employment. The price of shine, as the old Hollywood saying goes, was steep, and Tab was paying it in installments he couldn't refuse. The television era promised something different, or so it seemed. In 1966, Tab Hunter landed the lead role in The Tab Hunter Show, a sitcom built entirely around his charm and likability. For once, he had some creative control. The medium was less suffocating than film, more intimate in certain ways. But television was also relentless in its demands for accessibility. The public wanted to know everything about him, or thought they did. Magazines ran features about his lifestyle, his home, his romantic prospects. Television talk show hosts asked probing questions about when he planned to marry. The pressure to present a perfectly heterosexual image intensified dramatically. Dating starlets became not just a career move, but a survival strategy. He was photographed with leading ladies, escorted them to events, and was often seen leaving nightclubs with beautiful women on his arm. The closet, which had been constricting, became a coffin. He could barely breathe inside it, but stepping outside meant professional annihilation. What nobody could see, what Tab Hunter kept locked away with almost religious discipline, was the toll this double life was taking. The psychic cost of such constant performance, such total self-denial, manifests in ways that aren't always visible to the casual observer. Depression can hide behind a perfect smile. Anxiety can mask itself as professionalism. Loneliness can be indistinguishable from focus. The men and women who worked alongside Tab Hunter saw a professional, a consummate performer, someone who showed up on time and knew his lines. They didn't see the man going home to an empty house at night, the partner he couldn't acknowledge in public, the life he couldn't live. They didn't see the internal conflict that grew sharper with each passing year, the voice inside him that grew louder even as he forced it down deeper. By the 1970s, the cultural landscape had begun to shift, though glacially and unevenly. The sexual revolution had reshaped attitudes about sexuality, if not entirely in Hollywood. The closet, once an absolute necessity for survival, was becoming less of a guaranteed death sentence for some performers, though the risks remained enormous. Younger actors were beginning to live more openly, or at least with less surveillance. But for Tab Hunter, who had built his entire career on the promise of heterosexual masculine appeal, any public acknowledgement of his sexuality seemed impossible. Too much had been invested in the image. Too many people depended on the fiction. Coming out would feel like betrayal of the studios that had made him, of the audiences who had paid to watch him, of the carefully constructed edifice that had defined his entire adult life. Yet, there was also a different kind of cost to continued silence. The erosion of self-respect. The distance that grows between a man and his own truth over decades of denial. The relationships that couldn't fully develop. The love that couldn't be publicly claimed. The ordinary happiness that seemed permanently out of reach. Friends noticed a certain sadness in him, a weariness that no amount of professional success could dispel. Colleagues remarked on his professional distance, his politeness that never quite warmed into genuine connection. He became, in a very real sense, a ghost, present on the screen and in photographs, but absent from his own life. The decision to come out came in 1981, when Tab Hunter published his autobiography, Tab Hunter Confidential. By then, his career had largely cooled considerably. The parts weren't coming like they once had. The machinery that had made him famous had found newer faces, prettier boys, more tractable performers. In a way, the timing freed him. The industry had already moved on, so what did he have to lose? But the loss, retrospectively, was immense and irreplaceable. An entire career had been predicated on a lie. The roles he might have played, the relationships he might have pursued, the authentic life he might have lived, all had been sacrificed at the altar of a system that demanded his silence. The autobiography was brave, and it was also painful to read for those who had known him or loved his work. Fans who had grown up watching Tab Hunter, who had projected their own desires onto that beautiful, untouchable face, suddenly had to reckon with the fact that the image they'd loved had been, in a very real sense, a performance. Some felt betrayed by what they saw as a deception. Others, particularly younger LGBTQ+ audiences, saw him as a pioneer, one of the first major Hollywood stars to speak openly about his sexuality. But Tab Hunter himself seemed to feel less victorious than relieved, as though a weight he'd been carrying for decades had finally been set down, and the relief was tinged with sadness at all the years that had been lost. He continued working into his later years, appearing in television and independent films, sometimes playing roles that acknowledged his age and his history, sometimes not. He became something of an elder statesman in LGBTQ+ circles, a living reminder of what the studio system had cost and what freedom, even partial and late arriving, might feel like. He reunited with the woman he'd been romantically linked to in the 50s, Phyllis Gates, who had married Rock Hudson, in what many observers understood as a carefully orchestrated cover, and they remained close friends until her death, finding in each other a shared understanding of what it had meant to navigate Hollywood's impossible demands. What Tab Hunter's life ultimately illustrates is the human cost of the machinery that Hollywood had constructed and refined throughout the 20th century. He was not a victim in the classical sense. He was complicit in his own erasure, as one must be to survive in such a system. But neither was he wholly responsible for the choices he was forced to make. The studio system operated by taking young, beautiful, vulnerable people and requiring them to deny the most fundamental aspects of who they were. Tab Hunter did what millions had done before him and would do after. He survived. He paid the price. And he learned to live with what that price had cost him. Only in his later years, when the machinery had already moved on to other faces, could he finally tell the truth. By then, the cost had long since been paid, but the telling mattered nonetheless. A small act of reclamation, a moment of authenticity claimed from decades of performance. If stories like this speak to you, subscribe to explore more untold Hollywood histories.